Hello and welcome everyone. Today I am going to deal with Module 5, Models of Communication. Communication is an integral part of human existence. It decides the very identity of human beings. Our modern society is transforming into a information society, and communication is the transfer of this information from one individual to another. Communication is a process basically that involves sharing or transferring of information from the sender to the receiver with the use of an appropriate media in which the communicated message is understood by both the sender as well as the receiver. So, communication process starts with the transformation of information from the sender and ends with the receiver's feedback. In this particular topic or module, we are going to deal with what is meant by models of communication, its importance in communication, and the different types of models given by various intellectuals. Before I start with the content, let us go through the objectives that we need to achieve at the end of the session. At the end of the session, you will be able to state the meaning of models of communication. You would be able to list the importance of models of communication. You will be able to describe or explain the various models of communication. You will be able to discuss the relationship of the various elements of communication and also to list the criteria on which appropriate model of communication can be selected. Models of communication are conceptual in nature and are used to explain the communication process in humans. They can be graphically represented for easy comprehension of their process, and each communication model comprises of elements depicted in a sequential, logical and rational manner. Let us understand its importance. Communication model helps us to know about various aspects of communication, and therefore the importance of communication model can be described as follows. They help us in understanding the very nature of communication by highlighting the key features of communication with the help of different models. They show us how certain features are related to one another and provide a more orderly understanding of the communication. At another level, models have heuristic value. That is, they provide new ways to conceive hypothetical ideas and relationships. Various communication models represent the significant elements of communication process and help us in measuring the effectiveness of communication. Thereby, it helps us in our decision-making process. The communication models rely on pictorial, graphical representation of communication process. Here, the sender, receiver, message, media or channel and feedback, which are essential elements of communication process, are represented in the form of pictures. This graphical representation provides us with a complete idea of the communication process. The pictorial representation of various elements of communication process can be used as a sample for further research and investigation. Communication model can be used as an essential source of comprehending the nature of inflexibility, variability in communication. Each message which is communicated has certain objectives or goals, and these are represented in the communication model, thereby creating a meaningful communication. The above discussion presents how much importance communication model bears for modern communication. There are various models of communication given by different intellectuals. Let's have a look at them. That is the linear model of communication, the interactive model of communication, transactional model of communication, cascading model of communication and the circular model of communication. Our first model of interpersonal communication is the linear model. It was given to us by Lasswell in 1948. As the name suggests, this model depicts communication as a linear or one-way process in which one person acts on another person. This was a verbal model that consisted of 5 questions describing a sequence of acts that make up communication. It is also known as action model. Here you can see there are 5 questions. The flowchart clearly shows the questions: who said, what was being said, what channel was being used to transfer the information, to whom was the information transferred, and what was the effect of the information. The linear communication was further revised by mathematicians Shannon and Weaver and advocated one-way model to communicate with other. The linear model consists of the sender encoding a message and channeling it to the receiver in the presence of noise. The next 2 slides to help us understand the process of communication in the linear model given by Shannon and Weaver. As you can see, in the model, a source is at one end of the field. It encodes and sends information. This encoded message then travels through a neutral medium until it arrives at the other participant who receives the message. It is important to note that in this model, at any given time during a conversation or communication between people, only one party is expressing the information while the other party is exclusively absorbing the information. The source of noise is the existence of any disturbance that can be caused during a communication. Let us go through the various elements of the model and try to understand their role. The first one is the source. It is also known as information source. Source refers to a person who encodes a message. The communication process starts from the source. The second element is message. Message is a piece of information which is sent by the information source and received by the receiver. The next element is the transmitter, which is an instrument used to transmit information or message from the source to the destination. In case of Shannon's model, the transmitter is a telephone that captures audio signals from the source, converts it into electric signal and amplifies it for transmission through the telephone network. The signal is that which flows through a channel. There may be multiple parallel signals or there can be multiple serial signals. The next element is the carrier or channel. It is represented by the small unlabeled box in the middle of the model. The most commonly used channels include air, light, electricity, radio waves, paper, and postal systems. There may be multiple channels associated with the multiple layers of transmission. Noise. In Shannon's model, noise is restricted to noise that obscures or damages some portion of the signal within the channel. Next element that you see is the receiver. Receiver can be any person's set of ears and eyes. In Shannon's notion, the receiving phone instrument is the receiver. In television, there are various layers of receivers which include an antenna and a television set. In television, there are various layers of receivers which include an antenna and a television set. Our last element is the destination, a person who uses and processes the information. But this model has certain limitations. The main flaw in the model is that it is actually not a model of communication. Rather, it depicts a flow of information through a medium. It is incomplete and a biased model, applicable to systems like telephone and telegraph and not other media. Here the communication is depicted as one-way process where speakers only speak and never listens and listeners listen and never speak or send messages. The linear model assumes that there is a definite beginning and end to communication. It does not take into consideration the feedback from the receiver. For example, the communication process seen in a letter, email, text message or a lecture. Our next model is a more interactive model of communication which also goes by the same name, source. The factors like the person's background, prior experiences, attitudes, cultural belief and self-esteem affects the communication process. The process of communication in transaction model can be understood with the next diagram. The model presupposes that the person involved in the communication process are connected and they engage in transaction. In this model, as you see, each person is a sender receiver, not merely a sender or not merely a receiver. It identifies all elements which are involved in the communication that gets affected. Therefore, communication here is dynamic as well as simultaneous. The model contains sets that represent the communication environment, where the ellipses intersect is the most effective communication area because both the communicators share the same meaning of the message. For example, while talking or listening to friends, when one friend is talking to another, then the one listening will constantly give feedback using facial expression, verbal feedback without necessarily stopping the sender from conveying the message. The model also takes into account noise or interference in communication as well as the time factor. The outer lines of the model, as you can see, indicate that communication happens within systems that both communicators share or personal systems. It also takes into account changes that happens in the communicators' fields of personal and common experiences. The model also labels each communicator as both sender as well as receiver simultaneously. The advantage of this model is that good communication is established due to constant messages and feedback, while the limitation of this model is that it becomes more difficult to do so if the receiving side increases beyond the capabilities of the source. Our next model is the cascading model. The cascade communication process downloads team deliberations to all organizational level. At the same time, it uploads the organization's reactions, suggestions, alternatives and ideas back to the team, and all without elaborate technology. The benefit of this dynamic two-way communication is that teams truly become interactive bodies that tap into the creativity of the whole organization. A much better understanding of this model can be seen in this slide. Cascade communication work by sending messages down the chain from senior executives or executive board to senior managers. They in turn pass the message to their junior managers and then through every layer of management through to the workforce. Research shows that staff likes to receive information via their managers. This approach utilizes that personal touch. Let's understand this example. Senior managers or executive board meet to discuss the messages they want to see broadcast throughout the organization. These are then discussed with the internal communication team or the HR and the messages developed. Senior managers then call together all their direct reports and brief them. This process of reporting down occurs until everyone in the organization has received the message. We should note that meetings should not last more than 20 or 30 minutes. If they are longer, including feedback, questions and discussions, then there are too many messages or the messages given are too complicated. Let us look at the advantages and limitations of the cascading model. First, communication needs to be done quickly as it can lead to problems in message delivery. Often senior managers want to give too much information. Message can become corrupted as it is passed on, can suffer from managers refusing to give the message or holding on to information, the need to know or power syndrome. It will leak out if it is market sensitive, so one needs to be aware that it won't stay within the organization. This type of communication can be time consuming. It can become difficult over a multi-site or international organization and only works if senior executives buy into the system. Our last model is the circular model. This model was introduced by Osgood and Scram and highlights a two-way communication. Here, the response of the receiver is given importance. So, sender always anticipates feedback from the receiver. Therefore, the receiver of the message reacts in the context of the message forwarded by the sender. As a result, communication is completed. In the circular model, the communication is something circular in nature. The various elements in the process of communication are as follows. The first element is the encoder, the one who encodes the message and sends it. The encoder is also the originator of the message. He is also the starting point in the communication cycle. Next is the decoder, who receives the message and decodes it. The last one is the interpreter, who tries to understand, analyze, perceive or interprets the message. Throughout the communication process, there is an interpretation that goes on, and based on this, the message is received. The model breaks the conventional sender and receiver model and highlights communication in a practical way. Here, communication can take place at intrapersonal level within yourself or at the interpersonal level between people. In both the cases, each person acts as the sender and the receiver as well as the interpreter. The person thereby simultaneously encodes, interprets and decodes the message. The concept of semantic noise is introduced in this model, which implies to different meaning applied by the sender and the receiver to the same message. Semantic noise generally occurs due to words and phrases used by the sender and receiver, which causes a deviation or alteration of the actual meaning of communication. Let's have a look at the advantages of this model. It is a dynamic model and shows how a situation can change over time. It shows that redundancy is an essential part to combat the noise structure involved. It is a very practical and simple model, breaks the notion of conventional model and states that there is no separate sender and receiver. Sender and receiver is the same person. The communication cycle ends up where it started from. Communication is circular in nature and hence the communication completes. Feedback is the central feature. The sender and the receiver decodes, interprets and encodes the message. The disadvantage of this model is that it does not talk about semantic noise and it assumes the moment of encoding and decoding. Now we have come to the end of the session. With the help of this session, we understood what are models of communication, its importance in the process of communication and the various models of communications given by various intellectuals. Shannon gave us a linear model of communication, but it had certain limitations and advantages. The following models of communications given by different intellectuals helped us to overcome these limitations. So, it is very essential to create or establish a correct communication in the society.